And joining us now on the debate in the nation's capital, Conservative strategist Goldy Hyder, General Manager for Hill & Knowlton's Ottawa office, and journalist Elizabeth Thompson from Sun Media's Parliament Hill Bureau. And back here in studio, Liberal strategist Scott Reid, a principal with the speechwriting firm Feschuk Reid, pollster Donna Dasko, Senior VP at Environics Research, and communications consultant Allan, author of Political Conventions, The Art of Getting Elected and Governing. Nice to have everybody with us this evening. Both in the nation's capital and here in Toronto. I want to start by reading something that was in Maclean's magazine last week, courtesy of Scott Feschuk. You may know him.
I've heard of the guy.
You've heard of him.
Yeah.
Here we go. We're all political strategists now, conditioned by the media and the parties themselves to interpret everything through the prism of tactics and positioning. Everyone knows Jack Layton is avoiding an election this fall because his party is about as popular as a certain strain of salmonella. No one is bothered that he pretends otherwise. Their focus is whether his little fib, "We're doing it for the unemployed people of Canada," is likely to play well strategically. Spoiler alert, no. In 2008, the Prime Minister exploited a National Arts Centre gala for personal political gain by declaring that swanky galas attended by rich artists are an affront to ordinary working Canadians. Exactly a year later, the Piano Man was exploiting the very same NAC gala for personal political gain by playing merrily to the tuxedos. Is this hypocrisy? Sure. But we've all built up a pretty good immunity to hypocrisy. What we can't get enough of is the game. Who's up, who's down, what the latest poll says, what the strategists are strategizing, and what we do in their place. We'd make Iggy more decisive. We'd shave Jack's mustache. We'd paste Jack's mustache clippings on Iggy. We don't actually believe Stephen Harper has changed, become any warmer, grown or softened or evolved as a leader, but we admire him for being sharp enough to make it look as though he has. Sing us a song, Piano Man. You've got us feeling all right. Let me start with the political consultants on that one. Does that ring true to you?
Somewhat. You know,
that's
Scott Feschuk. Yeah, he's half as smart as his partner, that fellow. Look, I think the fundamental insight of that, from my perspective, is that we live in a postmodern, post-skeptic world. And, you know, politics is no longer viewed on its surface. It's viewed through the prism of, oh, what are they trying to achieve? What are the what's the strategy behind this? What are the tactics behind this? And so, yeah, you know, it places a premium, peculiarly enough, on authenticity, which is why I actually thought the blue sweater, as an example, because Scott mentions Stephen Harper, I thought the blue sweater did not work in the last election campaign.
Yeah, okay.
I don't think it worked because it didn't appear authentic. I do think that the NAC Gala event worked because the guy actually does play the piano. Now, do I think that's going to actually reform his image, change who he is, alter his politics, fundamentally disable the next political equation? No, I don't.
Hold off on that. We'll more on that in a second. Okay, Goldy, you tell me, is this basically ringing true, what I just read?
Yeah, I think you've hit the nail on the head, particularly when you talk about the tactics. I mean, the fact is the media focus on the tactics, and so it's all cyclical, right? Who's up, who's down, the got you journalism. And the second part of, I think, what you were saying was essentially the impact of social media, the fact that it's now 7/24 all the time, everywhere. People are thinking about it, people are talking about it. And so there's a sense that you know, you're being gamed, you know you're being gamed, and now you're determining whether it's working or not working, and then someone has to poll that and someone has to report on that. So it's a vicious cycle, but I'm not convinced it's necessarily a good thing. We're in an era of information warfare, but my own view is that the people are much, much smarter than we give them credit for.
Allan, you've watched a lot of this. You have advised a lot of political candidates over the years. Does style now trump substance in politics?
Well, sure, but let's not get carried away about how new any of this is. It's been forever thus. Adlai Stevenson had a group of speechwriters called the Elks Club that contained a Pulitzer Prize-winning Archibald MacLeish, as I recall from memory. He almost wore them out. He wanted a different speech every time. He was very concerned about his public image. Napoleon used to read his orders of the day to his corporal in the hopes that if his corporal understood them, his generals would. So communication skills have forever been with us. And in terms of the multi-channel universe, which I agree exists, to the best of my knowledge, most people still only watch one television program at a time.
Yes, I think that's, and hopefully it's this one right now.
While on their BlackBerry, while looking at their iPod, while on the internet on their computer, yes.
That's not a bad point. That's not a bad point at all. Donna, you have seen what moves numbers over the years. Is it more style or is it more substance nowadays?
Well, you know, we're very interested in the style aspects. Obviously, it's you read your quote. We watch television. We follow the game. I agree with the quotation that says we're all strategists now. People are interested in this. They are interested in the game, who's up and who's down. But I think the style aspects are overemphasized. I really do. I think that. We focus on the cardigan, the blue sweater, or the haircut, or the tie, or these kinds of things. I think these are superficial things, or the makeover. You know, we can name some politicians who've had makeovers over the past several years and so on. But I think this is overemphasized. I don't think it actually reflects what actually does move people. And it's not to say that image doesn't, because image is important, but I think we're emphasizing and talking about the wrong aspects of image. I think people do relate to and still relate to the qualities of leadership that are, you know, considered important. I think, you know, we can talk about the image of a leader in terms of their experience, their perceived abilities, their trustworthiness, likability. All of these kinds of dimensions are important dimensions for leadership, but that's not style. Those are leadership dimensions, and I think often we overemphasize the style.
Okay,
and it's exciting. It's fun. I don't think we shouldn't do this. I think it's an inevitable part of politics, and it actually gives us a little bit of lightness, but it's not what moves people, I don't think.
Elizabeth, where are you coming from on this?
Well, as a reporter, we see an awful lot of money being spent and a lot of effort going into controlling the image to a painstaking degree for politicians. I'll give one example. I covered the Prime Minister's trip up north. Now, the big question after the Governor General had eaten seal, was the Prime Minister going to eat seal as well? So we were on the lookout to see if he was going to try to consume this particular northern delicacy. And we kept asking, and they kept saying, oh, we're not sure, we're not sure. Finally, they decided they're going to eat seal. They wouldn't let any of us take pictures, I guess just in case somebody gagged when they did it. And instead, they released their own official photographer-taken picture. And we're seeing an awful lot of this, where the leaders increasingly are moving to their own official photographers so that they can control the image that comes out. But no matter how hard they try, we're living, as Goldy said, in a 24/7 universe. Social media is all over the place, and I'm sure that they had not wanted that video of the Prime Minister talking in Sault Ste. Marie to come out, because that was a very different image. They probably undid about 2 years worth of image making just in letting that one video, you know, hit the airwaves. And with YouTube, any moment that a politician is perhaps not being as guarded, they risk finding themselves available internationally on YouTube or on MySpace or on Facebook or on Twitter or any of the others.
Sure. Let me go to the political consultants again on this one. And okay, Scott, to you first.
Yeah.
How much of the time that you spent, you worked directly for Paul Martin when he was Prime Minister of the country, how much of your time was spent burnishing his image as opposed to the hard nuts and bolts of policy, for example?
Well, first of all, it's an artificial distinction. And it's an artificial distinction in this sense. What's an image, and, you know, what does the photograph look like? Those aren't necessarily all. It's just as Donna's saying, that isn't necessarily the fundamental contribution to what equals political success. I spend every second, every waking moment working toward trying to achieve political success. That wasn't just about what the photo looked like. Yes, that's an element to it, but it's also involved in what are the issues that you're championing. Fundamentally, it's this notion of what is the media frame? And what you really want to foster is a media frame around you that satisfies you, that actually perpetuates you in a way that real people can connect to you and say, I support this person. So I'll give you an example. For years, Jean Chrétien's media frame was the petit gars. He was a little guy from Shawinigan. It served him beautifully, and even more to the point, he understood that frame. He worked within it, he operated within it, he fed that frame. Constantly with his images, with the issues that he would champion, right? Later in politics, he became, you know, confronted with this other image of himself as, you know, a severe leader, the friendly dictator, that sort of thing. Maybe that's a function of being in politics and in government for so long. But these are the media frames that really affect you. Media will then take the photographs that are available to them. They'll take the images that are available to them, and they'll feed them through that frame. Your job, if you're working for a political leader, is to work hard to try to establish a frame that suits your leader and continue to feed it in a way that actually equals political success.
Goldy?
Well, for all the talk about the perfect picture and the perfect shot, I think ultimately, to my earlier point about how smart the people actually are, is that it's the actions that people are going to judge more than they are the words and or the perfect photo op, if you will. Ultimately, what political people are trying to do is in part frame an issue, frame a ballot question, frame a leader versus another leader. in the act of branding, if you will. So there's, of course, branding is taking place. You know, government wants to be seen as competent managers, and everything that they do will try and drive that. The opposition will be out trying to send a signal that, you know, these guys are incompetent and they need to be thrown out. So there's a lot of that branding debate that's taking place, but ultimately what the people look for are the actions of the leaders. And as I said earlier, you can't force people to buy something that they don't want to buy, and the shoe has to fit. It has to be a credible story to tell. And I can give you example after example where it worked, and I can also point to examples where it didn't work.
Allan, again, on this, Scott says it's an artificial distinction between image and policy. Do you think it is?
Well, I think we agree, because I think it's much more nuanced than the decision between substance and image, because the academic studies show that many good, decent voters use the term image or leadership or feel, something intangible, as a metaphor or a substitute for the policy or the decisions made or the substance of the person. So it's all wound up together. Let me give you a quick example. Timothy Krause, in a famous old book on journalism, said, called Boys on the Bus,
Boys on the Bus.
Said, a well-run bus is a well-run country. Meaning, if you make the bus run on time, don't lose the luggage, arrive in Moose Jaw when you said you were going to arrive, have beer and cookies on the bus for the reporters, you will be deemed to be capable of running the country. Well, I thought this was really superficial when I read it years ago. And I went to Columbia University to talk to Herbert Gans, a famous sociologist, and he said to me, as only an older man could counsel a younger man, look, if you can't run a bus, how on earth are you ever going to run the country? So sometimes these superficial metaphors have a substance behind them.
And
well, it's the lost luggage, right? It's not fair. Mr. Clark lost his luggage in '79 in India.
Just going to go to that. Yep.
Lots of luggage gets lost in India all the time. It's not like he lost his luggage.
Yeah, but
got
hang on.
lost, and next thing you know, you had hanging mittens.
All right,
unfair to him.
Let's go to the substance of that tour and be fair. The people who were on that tour, you talked to the old journalists who were, they said that was the least of the troubles on that tour. There were a lot more. And I interviewed Joe Clark in 1979 as a journalist, and the lost luggage, I think, was an accurate metaphor.
You can use Bob. You can use Bob Stanfield, right? He drops one ball. He caught all the others. The one ball he dropped ended up, and you know, one of your questions was about the impact of this. It's arguable that that dropped football may have deprived Canada of a very good prime minister. And some historians have written about that.
It's not the dropped football or the banana peel or whatever it is, or the lost luggage. What these incidents tell us is the reason they become so popular and so well spread is that they're telling us something about the leader. They're suggesting to us something about this leader that fits with an image we already have of this leader. So Joe Clark had an image of being a leader. Well, young, and there were other qualities. People were not entirely convinced that he had the leadership material.
He was young, and he was Joe Who also. People didn't know who he was.
Exactly. So the lost luggage fed into an image that already pre-existed about Joe Clark. Somebody else could have lost their luggage. Somebody else could have had an equally poor trip to India, but they wouldn't have gotten that publicity for the same incident. So so these things feed on an image that's there. They're not just out there as epiphenomena.
Which is precisely the point that I was making earlier with respect to media frames. Because let's not fool ourselves into thinking there's no selection involved here. Bob Stanfield caught the football 8 times, dropped it once. Yeah. Why did that image make its way across the country?
Well,
it made its way across the country because it reinforced the existing media frame on Bob Stanfield as a guy who was awkward and not quite coordinated, and that
certainly not compared
so people draw on symbols and truisms, not necessarily truths, but truisms.
And there's one more reason why.
Allan and then Goldy. Allan and then Goldy.
There's one more reason why that picture of Bob Stanfield dropping the football made the papers, because I've looked at the entire roll of film at CP. He was an older man. He was awkward. Even when he caught it, he looked bad. And that was very representative of what happened that day, and not the worst picture at all.
Goldy?
You know, we're all aware of Mr. Dion's famous interview in the last election where, you know, the clips of him getting it wrong out of the gate ran. Now, it's possible that that happened because the media fell into the frame that Mr. Dion is not a leader, and this goes to the competency of the leadership. He's not unique. A lot of people have restarted their live interviews, or excuse me, their taped interviews, because they got something wrong. But because it fit, you ran with it. And I go back again to the core message I'm delivering, which is The people are too smart for all of this. The people should be trusted well beyond all of us smart people sitting around this table. They were told Paul Martin would win the largest majority in the history of Canada. He lost. They were told Stephen Harper would never be Prime Minister. Well, the history is being written differently. So let the people decide. They're a lot smarter than we give them credit for.
Elizabeth, let me follow up on the Harper angle here, because I guess of all of the examples, the most recent and most discussed is this performance by the Prime Minister at the National Arts Centre recently, where he came out there and he played that Beatles tune on the piano, Get By With a Little Help of My Friends. How do political reporters, who are not necessarily the best arts reporters, but who cover politics, how did they play into the whole, you know, all of the buzz around that event?
Well, I think he was helped as well by the fact that new media very much is a part of our jobs now. So here was something you could put up on blogs, you could put up on websites, link to it on YouTube. It softened his image, and especially, you know, he diffused everything quite quickly with that one line, you know, would you stand up and, if I sang out of tune, would you stand up and walk out on me? That said, he's also very good when he goes to the press gallery dinner. He has a lot of humor. He doesn't like doing it, it seems, because he chose the hockey game rather than the serious press gallery dinner.
There's more votes in Montreal than there are at the press gallery dinner.
Exactly, but one of the other things that was mentioned earlier about perception, about the selection of pictures and things like that, before I was in Ottawa, I worked in Quebec City for a number of years when Lucien Bouchard was there, and I defy anyone to find very many pictures of Lucien Bouchard getting out of a car. Generally, that we didn't show that. It was a consideration for Mr. Bouchard because everyone knew he had an artificial leg, but we didn't show pictures that really, where it was really that obvious. So there was a certain selection there, and it went. It was a selection that benefited Mr. Bouchard.
Scott.
Well, I want to jump on the Harper thing because it's gotten so much attention and it's so topical these days. Because I do think that it was, I think it was a great little piece of political theater, and it's. Yes, there's a new media element to it, that and all that, but it actually is, as Allan was saying earlier, it's one of the oldest tricks in the trade, right? Playing against type. It's one of the most...
I was going to say, that's you gave us the metaphor of the frame earlier. That's way out of his frame.
No,
so why did that work so well?
But because it's a comfort level, because once he's established enough, it demonstrates, and this should be a real concern if you're a liberal like myself, he's comfortable enough in his current frame that he actually can have, he has the capacity now that he can play against type. Let me tell you what I think his frame is, that he understands very well and is working hard at reinforcing day in and day out, and that is incumbency. I think probably better than most prime ministers we've seen in quite a long time, he understands how to frame himself as an incumbent prime minister. He doesn't ask to be loved, he doesn't ask to be right all the time, but he has a sense of confidence and stability about him, and that's what he emphasizes and projects.
You know what,
in his images, and in his policies, and in his manner.
Goldy, just before you get in, I know this thing's had tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of plays on YouTube, and people have seen it, but for those who may not have, let's play a snippet of it. Here's the PM at the NAC. Roll tape, please.
Oh, I get by with a little help from my friends. I'm gonna try with a little help from my friends. I get high with a little help from my friends. Yes, I get by with a little help from my friends. A little help from my friends.
You know, Goldy, I went to the Argo-Eskimo football game a few days after this happened, and I swear to you, the couple sitting behind me at the football game started talking about this in the middle of the football game, which may say more about the Argos, actually. But they said...
Or the Leafs game.
and the woman said to the man, you know what? For the first time ever, I think he actually looks human.
Yeah. And
so
you know,
mission accomplished, is that right?
Well, it's not so much about mission. I think what you're essentially seeing is, first of all, a prime minister who's getting comfortable with the role of being prime minister. I mean, as Scott's been near one, he knows it's not an easy place to be. It can be a very lonely thing. It's a very private thing. It's even more complex when you're a complex person. And Stephen Harper, known him a long time, is a complex person. He's a private person, but he's getting comfortable with who he is. Let's be clear, not a lot of people could have made him do something like that, but he was comfortable enough in his skin to go out and do it, and it was really who he is. Anybody who knows him knows he plays the piano. Anybody who knows him knows he likes to sing some Beatles songs. They know he actually has people over to do that at 24 Sussex. So it was not out of character. I'll give you an example, if I can, where he was out of character and it didn't look right. And that was when one day when him and Mr. McKay came out to throw the football around, if you'll recall, on Parliament Hill.
Peter McKay, yeah.
That as someone who's known him, he's not a football thrower like that. So that looked a little out of character, whereas this looked totally in character, very real. And I think people like people to be who they are. They will respect you for your policies. They will respect you for your leadership, but it doesn't hurt to be liked as well.
Okay, Donna?
Well, I think this is a great anecdote. I think this piano playing episode is a perfect example of what I was saying earlier. This is light entertainment. This is a man playing the piano, and I think people are making way too much of the impact of this. I mean, this is the side of politics that's light. It's fun.
Got a
it's
5-point bump in the polls after this happened. Coincidence,
Steve,
right?
I don't think it was related to that. I absolutely don't. I disagree with the analysis that says that these kinds of things are important. And I think if you look over the long term, if you look at the way polls go, and if you look at it does not happen. You might see a blip here and there that are related to these kinds of things. But you know, Elizabeth is talking about the seal meet and the press gallery dinner and all these. These are great stories, and everybody who's in politics loves to follow these things and go there and watch these things. But they truly don't have the impact that is often attributed to them.
Oh, Allan has got a very
They
quizzical
honestly
look on his
don't, and
face
you
right
can
now.
look at the polls over time, and you can see how you can see what moves public opinion. It's still
And that doesn't. In your view, that doesn't.
I would say that this is rather insignificant in the scheme
Okay.
of things.
I
This
agree
is
with
the,
Donna. I
this
agree
is
with
the
Donna.
story
Let me hear
of the week.
Allan Bonner's turn.
I'll agree. Well, we're all fighting to agree with Donna. I will agree to this point. I think that might be worth 2 to 3 points in a poll. I think that's below the margin of error. It's very difficult to tell, and those are soft numbers that will disappear in due
Exactly.
course. Where I won't agree, though, is in the so-called defining moment. And this is mainly from retail research, but there are moments when you're shopping at a store or watching a TV program or supporting a leader where you say, enough already, I am breaking with this person or this policy. And some of these insignificant things or superficial things or photo opportunities, and Stockwell Day is coming to your mind, I know, can be just one too many times at the well and enough already.
Scott.
Well, I'm going to bravely agree and disagree with Donna as well. And here's, I agree that we make too much of this. I disagree, and I disagree strenuously, that these things don't actually matter ultimately. And I'll tell you what I mean by that. It depends on what we're talking about the it is. If the it is one little image, a quip at a press gallery dinner, a shot at the NAC, no, that's not going to fundamentally determine the electoral outcome in the next election. But it isn't just about image, as I said before. It's about creating the frame, and it's about reinforcing the frame, and it's an iterative process. Images contribute to it.
Iterative process?
It means stack one thing on top of another. So you stack an image on top of a quip, on top of a tone, on top of a policy. These things all combine to strike through and to break through to people and create an impression of that person. And that is what ultimately it's an osmotic process. And if you understand that, then you can try, you won't always succeed, you can try to contribute to it. But it has to be authentic, because Scott is right. Everybody is a strategist now, and the one thing that people spot above all else these days is BS.
I got
That's
a great
true.
piece of tape
I
I got
agree
to
with
show
that.
you. You guys have got to check this out. This is apropos of what you said earlier, that there's nothing new under the sun, and yes, we've been at this for a long time. Our wonderful visual research team went into the bowels of the basement of this place and plucked out some footage that is nearly 40 years old. This is former Premier William Davis, having just taken over, getting some media training from somebody. I think it might be Bob Teeter out of the States, I'm not sure. Here's Mr. Davis learning how to do a proper interview almost 40 years ago. Roll tape.
Again, in as few words and as succinct a statement as possible, can you tell me how do you feel about unemployment?
Unemployment is one of the very basic concerns of government. Unemployment, no.
Can you answer that by saying something like, I don't like unemployment?
Yeah, okay. I can't accept a high rate of unemployment. I believe that every person who has the capacity, the desire, and wants to work, that we should have an obligation to find a job opportunity for that individual.
Can you say that again by saying, I want everybody to have a job?
Yeah. I don't like unemployment. I want everybody to have a job.
Okay, now this is what you do today, so I want to start with you, Allan. This is obviously not the very comfortable in his own skin Bill Davis who, you know, in the 1980s would win back his majority government. This is a guy who's 41 years old and not all that comfortable in his own skin at this point. But is that how it still works today?
Well, yeah, look, I went on the web and took a look at some of the slogans that are in Prime Minister speeches, Premier speeches, and so on and so forth. The Alberta Premier recently made a speech called The Way Forward. I should hope so. How can you go backwards? Saskatchewan's tagline is Saskatchewan strong and steady. Newfoundland standing strong in the fight against poverty. Not necessarily doing anything about it,
but
standing strong. The flexing of thigh muscles and calf muscles are addressing poverty in Newfoundland. Every job counts in BC. Now, when I have somebody in media training who says something vacuous like that, I say, oh, hold on. If I were still working in a newsroom, stop the presses. Let me find the jobs that don't count. That's the story I want to do. In other words, you use the obverse. So sure, it's still, what is the substance of the matter? And then you'd say to Bill Davis, you know, look at me, the interviewer, ignore the camera, lean forward, look more engaged, the kind of things that you have done for decades naturally. But it's also a balancing act. The substance behind these slogans and the performance, so people pay attention.
Goldy, is that how you do what you do?
Absolutely. I think, as I said, substance matters. You know, you look at the example that Donna was just talking about on the piano. I think if you poll the question, you know, are you more in favor of the Conservative Party because the Prime Minister has some skills on a piano? Or is it because this is the government that doesn't want an election right now? Most people feel they don't want an election right now, and that the Liberal Party seems to be calling for an election. So did the poll numbers move because of competency in government, leadership in government, and an economic plan? Or did they move because the man was able to sing a Beatles song? So I repeat again, I think the people see through that. It doesn't hurt that he can play the piano, but it's not the reason those poll numbers move. Substance made those numbers move.
Scott?
Well, yeah, I prefer to call it glibly, message training, because it actually is a combination of being able to express things that matter in a cogent fashion, but also understand the technical requirements of the job. I mean, these are real things and they're important. That is a camera that I'm looking into right now. There is nothing more unnatural on earth than looking into a camera and doing a double-ender interview. And if you're not trained, if you aren't taught to do it, if you don't practice it a couple of times, you're going to look bad at it. And when you look bad at it, probably the first mistake you'll make with respect to a double-ender is you won't be looking directly at the camera. People say, hey, that guy's not making eye contact with me. Can't trust him. Boom. So message is critically important. You need to be able to find a rhythm. But at the same time, let's not underestimate the technical requirements.
Elizabeth, I wonder if you could, given your perch on Parliament Hill, let us into some of the insights you may be seeing on a daily basis behind the very public education of Michael Ignatieff as he tries to, frankly, learn how to be a politician after doing something else the previous 60-some-odd years of his life. How's that going?
Well, there's been quite a transformation. When I first saw Mr. Ignatieff back in Canada, it was at Concordia University. It was before he had even, there were some rumors that he might come back to Canada and might be looking at the leadership. I remember listening to his speech at Concordia, turning to a colleague who was a political columnist, Don McPherson, and we both of us were scratching our heads and figuring out, how is this guy ever going to be a politician? It was as dry as sawdust. It might work in Harvard, but it wasn't going. You need someone who can light up a room. They make, you know, people come a long way to hear a political leader speak, and you need someone who can make them feel like the trip's been worth it, and that they've learned something, and they come away feeling good from a rally. Mr. Ignatieff did not have that at that point. Sudbury, fast forward to Sudbury after the leadership, he still didn't quite have it. Sudbury, he was starting to show some signs of it, but in the last little while, I don't know what happened. He looks like the doe just before they get hit by the truck or something like that, because he just seems to have lost his confidence, and I don't know what it was that did it, but that's the image that he's projecting now. And I think that people really do have a sense that when something's natural and authentic and when it's not. It's like when Stephen Harper had that photo op, you know, where he shook his kids' hands at the school gate. I saw him on the way to school with his daughter today, and he was walking hand in hand with her down the street. That's the real Stephen Harper, and people could tell what the other one was fake.
Allan Bonner.
Well, I think Ignatieff is a great example of how image and substance are wound together and may even mean the same thing. And here's what I mean. He's gone from a weak positive to a weak negative, and with Herculean efforts may crawl all the way back up to a weak positive. If a group like this had been sitting around with him 5-8 years ago, and he said, you know, I might want to come back to Canada and run, one of us would have said, not a bad idea. Let's get one of the Liberal provincial premiers to appoint you to some kind of position to study something. Let's make you a one-man royal commission. Let's get you making some speeches. Let's at least put you in charge of some NGO or charity.
Let's bring you to Canada.
In other words, he didn't have an entrance strategy, and that is a leadership flaw that is unmistakable. And the fact that journalists and others view him as a little awkward or out of it, and you noted that he said Regent's Park about Toronto when it's Regent Park. Small point, but it's emblematic of the fact that he didn't do his homework and didn't have an entrance strategy years before he made this move.
Well,
Donna, then Scott.
Well, I think Elizabeth pointed to something that I think is important, and there are different qualities or strengths that people have as communicators, and some people are terrible in person, one-on-one, but they're magnificent but they're magnificent on the stage.
On the stump, sure.
And we all know examples of these kinds of people. For example, some of us may remember John Crosby. He was a person who was very difficult to talk to in person if you met him or spoke to him. On the stage, he was magnificent. He was a wonderful speaker. He told fantastic jokes. He had an incredible style. And you'll see the reverse of that. Brian Mulroney was a very much of a glad-hander. He, when you met him and talked to him, he was always, he remembered people's names, and he had all these incredible interpersonal skills. But yet on the stage, on the platform, he often came across as insincere. So, we have different kinds of qualities as communicators, and these are part of the things that people are judging when they look at leaders.
Scott,
I think, like a broken record or a disciplined political communicator, I'm going to return to the same point, the frame, and I think it's actually kind of illustrated a little bit by this discussion. Now, some of the qualities and some of the mannerisms in Michael Ignatieff were actually heralded in December of this past year as strengths. People would say, he speaks in a naturally slow manner. He's got a sort of steadiness to him. He sounds solid, comfortable, steady. Those are all heralded as reasons why this guy is actually got the stuff to be the next prime minister. Now we're going over, suddenly the frame is, oh, they're down in the polls and this guy doesn't know which way to go. And so now we're talking about Regent versus Regent's Park and all this stuff. My point is this. You want to talk about a tough job in politics? There is no tougher job than breaking a media frame that is negatively established on you.
particularly if you're the leader of the opposition.
But
well,
it
it's
can
a
be
lousy
done.
job to begin with.
It can be done.
Yeah.
Joe
It can
Clark,
be done.
let me say, Joe Clark did it, although probably not in a fashion that suited his interest, because he went from being Joe Who to a respected world statesman. Unfortunately, he had to quit being prime minister first to do it.
Goldie,
I'd
go
argue
ahead.
one of the most, well, let me just, on the last point, I'd argue that Mr. Stockwell-Day is one of the most competent members of Mr. Harper's cabinet, and given his history, one would have said, boy, that's a big transformation for him as to how the media had him branded. So leave that one aside for a second, though. I'd like to talk about Mr. Ignatieff, because I think he is in many ways responsible for his own problems. He's almost giving the conservative advertising a brand bonus, if you will, by reinforcing what the messages of those are. Because to Donna's point, these ads only work because they're speaking to what people have already perceived. If you poll people, they will say, there's just something not right about someone just coming back out of the blue, as Allan was saying, and suddenly saying, I want to run the country. I haven't been here, I don't know much, I don't know Regent versus Regents, but I'm ready to run the country. And when you feed that perception that people have, what you're getting is the frame of Michael Ignatieff is being established as he is in it for himself. And when you look at the Forest
but
ad,
hang on a
it
sec.
doesn't
Okay, hang
seem
on.
natural
I got to
to
follow
Forest
up here.
ad.
Goldie, hang on a sec. Let me follow up here. Why haven't people come to, let's flip the coin over and look at the other side. Why haven't they said, wow, this guy is an international superstar. He's decided to give all that up to come back to Canada to do the really lousy job of being leader of the opposition because he wants to do some public service. Why hasn't that happened?
Well, it did.
Goldie, that's for you.
You want me to answer that question?
I want you to answer that.
He's got his own advisors. He can get his own help. But I think one of the reasons is because, the challenge for the Liberal Party, and the Liberal Party that suffered some electoral defeats it's not accustomed to, is it doesn't know how to position itself as an opposition party. The leaders have not gotten off to a proper launch, if you will. They have been largely left to be defined. And in this business, either define or be defined. And the Conservatives have been successful in defining the last two leaders quite well.
Donna.
Steve, you were saying, why hasn't it happened?
Right.
I would say it can happen, because we have seen this happen before. We have seen changes in leadership image. And let me give you a perfect example. Jean Chrétien, in 1990, when he was chosen leader of the Liberal Party, he was seen as yesterday's man. And by the time he won the election in 1993, his image had completely transformed.
But he needed the Conservative Party to implode to have the opening
and
for
a
that
water
to
ski.
happen.
And a water ski.
No, I don't agree. I don't agree with the
that.
water skiing. I think that was one of those superficial things. But his image did change from yesterday's man. And by the time 1993 came around, nobody was calling Jean Chrétien yesterday's man. His image had changed, and the reason it changed was because he worked at it, and he did it the old-fashioned way.
2 minutes here, and I want to hear Scott. Scott, you know the conventional wisdom of the country today is he's 15 points down, Ignatieff, behind Harper, and it's in cement. And it's not going anywhere.
Yeah.
How do you change that?
Well, you change it by changing it, and you change it not by saying, all right, well, then what I need to do is get a quick fix in. You have to say to yourself, this is going to be some hard work and it's going to take slogging away. So go back to first principles. What is it that's going to matter most? What are people not hearing that they need to hear? Well, I'll give you an example. I mean, I don't want to get into political strategy here, but what they're not hearing is about fundamental issues that appeal to the middle class. So what they were hearing for 3 months was all about politics, talking about this kind of stuff, right? We can talk about this stuff. Political leaders shouldn't be talking about this stuff.
Right.
And I think that one of the challenges that Mr. Ignatieff faces is to go back and leverage his strengths rather than try to be and demonstrate, hey, you know what? I'm in this political game now and I get it and I know this politics
Elizabeth,
stuff.
take the last 30 seconds and tell me whether or not all of this stuff we're talking about today actually serves the citizens of this country well.
I think that image does count, but images can be changed. The example that comes to my mind is Gilles Duceppe. I don't know if any politician has had a worse image than Gilles Duceppe in looking woebegone in the hairnet with the lost bus and everything like that. He turned it around. Ignatieff can probably turn it around, and Harper has already turned it around.
Good enough. That's got to be the last word today. Can I thank our folks in Ottawa tonight, Goldy Hyder from Hill and Knowlton, Elizabeth Thompson from Sun Media. Good of both of you to be there tonight for us in the nation's capital. Scott Reid, Chuck Reid, Donna Dasko, Environics Research, Allan Bonner, Political Conventions, The Art of Getting Elected and Governing. That's his latest book. My thanks to the three of you as well. Now, for more information about tonight's guests and more of that video of former Ontario Premier William Davis being coached by his political advisors, please visit us online at tvo.org/theagenda.